Hey, welcome back to the podcast. I want to read you a quote, and it's all about storytelling. It says, storytelling has been used for thousands of years to convey a message that moves people into action. Storytelling has been used for thousands of years to convey a message that moves people into action. That is from the StoryBrand website. So I want you to picture something. Okay. Picture this: a 30-something mom with her AirPods in, cooking dinner for her 4-year-old son and her husband. She's at the stove and she's listening to a podcast episode. And as the podcast guest is speaking, something happens inside of her. A small fire in the pit of her stomach is stoked. Not something out of the blue for her, but something that felt super unique. See, she'd started her podcast a few years before and wanted to make it into a business. She wanted others to stop hiding behind their fears, stop hiding behind their computers and their paid speaking event microphones, and she wanted them to step out. She had just done a baby step, starting her podcast a few years back when most people were unaware of what even was a podcast back in 2016. More on the story in a minute, okay? But I want you to think about when you're looking at the Bible and it's written in narrative, it's written in story, a lot of stories put together. I've been reading the Bible chronologically, and it's amazing when you really see it that way. It just puts a different lens on as you're reading. And it's not to highlight the flawed person in the story, but yes, we do know humankind is flawed, but it's to highlight God's character in the story, the faithfulness of God, the character of God. And so when I hosted the Friends of a Feather a while back, I interviewed women sharing their God stories with me. Some of them had shared their story publicly and some had not. And most of the ladies who had not shared their story in a public setting had boldness. They had gumption, and they knew the meaning of their God story. Maybe not knowing the meaning of why their story went the way it did, but they knew the meaning of their trial was to give God glory through it. Most everyone who came on the show had a commonality, and they said it all out loud. And they wanted their story to point back to the Lord, to point back to how he is faithful, to give him glory in their story, even through the pain, even through the unexpected, even through the grief, through every single part of their story. So let me get back to what I was telling you earlier about that story about the woman standing at her stove. So that woman that had a podcast, but didn't know how to make money at it, that was hiding behind her guest on her podcast because she didn't think she had a story to share. That was me. So why does your story matter? It matters because you matter to God, and you can bring him glory in sharing your story. Sharing stories is one of the ways that we feel connected to each other. Storytelling is a great way to feel connected, to be relatable. On my friend Laura Howe's podcast, it's called Hope Made Strong. And her guest recently, Jeff Price, said, people admire strength, but they identify with weakness. Your story matters. So what story do you want to tell with your podcast? How can your story relate to your business? Mine, I hid behind my friends' stories. I didn't share my story because of that. I didn't step out and do what I'm called to do because I was hiding behind the microphone, hiding behind my guest. But God wanted to use my story to reflect his glory in it, to help other women share their story and how it's part of their business, just like for me. Recently, I have been starting to say affirmations out loud in front of the mirror. Why? Because there's just something extra about speaking it out loud, who I am in Christ and what I'm wanting to remember about what he's called me to do. And if you have been in Christian circles for very long, you have heard of Lisa Turkhurst. Lisa shares recently about the most recent part of her story, which is the devastating loss of her marriage. She recently said that what if this painful breaking is part of a beautiful remaking? What if this painful breaking is part of a beautiful remaking? Wow. I'm not telling you to air out all your dirty laundry. That's not what I mean at all. But would you consider sharing the hard, sharing the struggle, the breaking, as Lisa puts it, from your story? And in overcoming the hard parts of your story and sharing it will be transformational for someone else. Someone who needs your help, someone who needs the answer to the problem that you can solve, which is your offer. So the question I want to ask you is, what parts of your story has God called you to share? How does your story relate to your business? Donald Miller, in his Building a StoryBrand book, says, as a brand, it's our job to pursue our customers. We want to get to know them and for them to get to know us, but we are the ones who need to take the initiative. We cannot take the initiative if we haven't shared our story. When we haven't shared the transformation we have had in our lives to be able to lead others in their transformations. The exposure, the visibility, the initiative, the beautiful remaking, that is what sharing your story on your podcast is about. Me, when I look back to that 30-something-year-old mom with a 4-year-old and a husband as I was cooking dinner and listening to Christy Wright speak on Jamie Ivy's podcast, a fire was stoked in me that I cannot explain, except that I heard in my heart, you are going to have a business one day. And it took my story of the struggle of figuring things out of how to podcast, how to start one, how to continue one, how to do all the things for me to bring me through that so that now I can help others. I can help other women step into the calling that God's given them to start their podcast for their business. So the cool thing is that you can explode your exposure. You can take the initiative that Donald was talking about. You can linger in that beautiful remaking that Lisa models. And in sharing parts of your story, it's all accomplished through doing one thing. And you probably can guess it, right? Yeah, it's a podcast. You may even ask, what if people don't know about me or my business? So let me ask you this. Has visibility been on your Q3 goal list? Maybe it's been on your Q1, quarter 2 list, but nothing ever gets accomplished. Well, the best way to explode your exposure in the online space is to have a place where you can communicate with your future clients, to share your story of where you once were with those warm leads listening in to your podcast. The most intimate of ways to connect with your audience is by sharing your story, your words on your own branded podcast with your name, your original content, and your story in it. Okay, so if this is you, I want you to book a call with me. Simply click the link in the show notes. This link will take you to my Calendly link so that you can pick a time slot that works for you. I look forward to seeing your reservation in my inbox. And remember, I'm here to help you because life is too short to just wing it. Bye, friend.